Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Methods Guru for Sage MethodSpace. And I'm happy today to be joined by Helen and Su-ming Khoo to talk about researching in the age of COVID-19 and the series of books they've put together to help us understand what's going on and how to move forward. But before we get started, if you are new to MethodSpace, this is a blog community sponsored by Sage Publications, and we're interested in all aspects of designing, conducting, analyzing research, and then sharing it through writing and other emerging and electronic approaches. And at the heart of it, we have teaching and learning, because we're all learning, and we want to provide guidance for student and novice researchers, and for those of us who are trying to take new approaches to our own research. So Helen and Su-ming, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Hello, I'm Helen. I'm an independent researcher. I've been an independent researcher for over 20 years and an independent scholar for nearly 10 now. That means I don't work with a university or an organization. I work for myself, and I write and teach on research methods and research ethics around the world.
And hello, I'm delighted to be here. I'm Su-ming Khoo. I'm a lecturer in the School of Political Science and Sociology at the National University of Ireland in Galway. And I have about equivalent experience, I suppose, just over 20 years experience as a tenured lecturer in a university in a traditional academic setting.
So we know why these books are important right now. So why don't you begin by giving us a little bit of background on the project, why you took this particular approach, and what it is that you're hoping to accomplish with this project.
Well, when we went into lockdown pretty much around the world earlier in 2020, I was thinking about research and research methods, and a lot of people were talking about pivoting interviews online and so on and so forth, but I kind of figured there was more to it than that. So when I'd had a bit of time to think, I wrote a blog post called Research Methods to Consider in a Pandemic. And I focused on documentary research, autoethnography, and digital research as options for researchers to think about. And I figured that was a contribution, that I could make. And so I wrote it and I posted it, and people liked it and shared it on Twitter. And my editor at Policy Press read my blog post and sent me an email saying, "Would you like to edit a collection for us on this topic?" I always knew it was a mistake giving her my blog address. So I thought about this, and I thought, yeah, that would be a good idea, actually, because if we found out what people are actually doing beyond just moving interviews online, and shared that with the research community. And Policy Press, they're a not-for-profit publisher with a strong social justice ethos, which is one reason I like to work with them. And they saw this as a way to get something out very quickly, just digitally, to publish very, very quickly by publishing standards. They wanted to get the books out in October. They figured, back in May, they figured the pandemic would still be going on in October, which clearly it will be, and that researchers around the world would benefit from some help. So I thought about this, and I thought I would like to do it, but not on my own. And I was thinking about who I would like to maybe ask to do it with me. And I made a little short list of people that I could think of. And then I did some research into those people online. And I decided that my top pick was a woman called Su-ming Khoo from the National University of Ireland. So I sent her an email one Thursday, out of the blue. We'd only met twice. And we weren't even in touch on Twitter then, I think. I sent her an email saying, "I've been asked to do this thing and I'm kind of interested, and I wondered whether you might be interested too." And she replied very quickly saying she thought she was interested. And we had a chat online, and we were still saying, well, no commitment, no obligation, but let's just go to the next step. Before we knew it, we got a call for chapters out. And we thought we might get 15 or so good contributions, and then we could make a nice little ebook. In fact, we got 104 contributions.
Wow.
though there was a really tight deadline, we only gave people about 2.5 weeks, 104 contributions, and most of them were good. Not all, but most. So now we're producing these 3 ebooks. Each one has 11 chapters, and they're all good. And this is about researching in the age of COVID-19. And later there will be a print book, which is about research methods in times of crisis. So that's broader than the pandemic. And that will come along in a year or so. So that's far down the line. But these ebooks, we still don't have a firm publication date, but they're still on target for publication in October. And it's been an amazing journey doing this with Su-ming and all our contributors. Our contributors have been fantastic too. So yeah, that's been really good.
So do you want to kind of walk us through the volumes?
Yes, sure. Yeah. So it's really interesting even how we got in all those expressions of interest and abstracts, and then started to make a selection, and then decided together with Policy Press how many volumes there would be to honor the high quality of submissions that we had. And then basically, you know, applying, well, what's a fairly standard kind of qualitative method to come up with, you know, how we would actually structure the volumes and what the thematic interests would be. So there are basically 3 volumes. And the first volume speaks to the kind of immediate concerns of responding and reassessing in research terms, because researchers can't get out and do their research because they have to think about, well, what else can they do, and what do they already have to hand that might be considered, and also, you know, what has to have extra attention, what do people need to think about, and what are the different kinds of needs and capabilities that there are there. So that immediately suggested this kind of tripartite sectioning of the first volume of responses and reassessments into going digital. That was the pivoting online. And then we have a number of really brilliant contributions on doing things online. The first chapter is about using computer-aided technology to actually decide what's the most amount of callbacks, you know, you should do. How do you optimize using computer-aided techniques to optimize your telephone interviewing? Then there's reorganization of science camps. These were higher education science literacy interventions in multi-campuses and multi-countries. So that's another interesting thing about the contributions. Many of them came from teams of multi-country researchers who had to kind of pivot, but already had some competencies and some digital aspect built in. There's 2 women, African women contributors, then Almighty and Chafak and Deborah Keeley, who look at the digital divide in using Skype in both the global south and the global north setting. So the north-south aspect is also a strong theme throughout the contributions, and thinking about using different kinds of sources. Then with the methods in hand, we have what are the established quantitative and qualitative methods that there are there, that in a time of COVID-19, it's really important to be able to do research on the social impacts. But so we have chapters by very experienced statistical experts on using quantitative probability samples and what kinds of technical fixes can and cannot be applied, piggybacking COVID research onto existing longitudinal surveys and large social surveys, for example, and also using farmer networks. So the chapter by Hens, Paganini, and Siltstober is about using existing networks of farmer researchers, and it's really about collaborative research, and the methods at hand are really all about the established research relationships. And then we have a section on the different needs and capabilities, including one on specifically the human development and capabilities approach, one which is looking at moving research online, and then one which is looking at, oh yes, this is the last one, which is on a systematization of experiences. So already we are seeing in responding and reassessing that established methods from the global south, in this case, the systematization of experiences, that is something that is a specialization that is developed from community-based research in Latin America. So that's, sorry, this is, am I going on too long here?
No, that's fine.
Okay, great. So that's, we're just going to the second. So the second volume thematically seemed to cluster or braid together or twine together two threads. And these were threads of care and resilience. And we started the volume with chapters about researcher care and resilience. So that volume starts off with a very practical and kind piece by Petra Boynton on care for the researcher and their researcher well-being and safety. Then there's a chapter about working with disability, both working with disabled participants, but also by a researcher with disability. And then a chapter by Stephanie Snow, which is a fascinating example of pivoting research, which a research project that had already was quite advanced, the NHS at 70 oral history project, and how COVID-19 was a kind of a pause and a critical juncture for the research, which caused them to shape their research in a particular way. But again, very much thinking about care about the interviewer as well as the participant, and caring about the NHS as a system as well, which I thought was an amazing part of that research. And then, so participant care and then shared care.
So in this volume, did any of these people, in addition to talking about, say, self-care for themselves as researchers, talk about, say, the relationship between research supervisors and students or faculty and student researchers?
Let me just think about this for a second. There are several contributions throughout the 3 volumes which have something in that about bringing research teams. So I think that chapter by Rachel Yoho and her team relate to, it's not so much supervisors and students, but it's as how do you develop kind of the theme of care and resilience among a research team as a community of researchers and their capacities, you know, as professionals.
Right.
If that makes sense. So there wasn't anything specifically about the supervisor-supervisee relationship, but it was much more about research teams. And we've got a lot throughout the 3 books, which blends researchers at different stages of their research. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that, you know, it seems like those chapters would be helpful to research supervisors, because I mean, what I'm hearing from people I know who supervise research, and that's, you know, kind of my former walk of life, is that it's you know, students are you know, facing, you know, all kinds of issues about, you know, their you know, family members being sick, or their, you know, employment being disrupted, children, etc., and you know, making it difficult to really, you know, focus on their research. And so, you know, it seemed like this volume would be very helpful to people who are, you know, trying to support, you know, other researchers, you know, through this time.
Yeah, I think it would, if I can just hop in for a minute.
Yes.
I think it would. And I think we didn't get much directly around that, because our call for chapters was very much focused on the doing of research itself. And that was what we wanted to put out there. But there is a lot here. I mean, Nick Grattan's chapter 2 also speaks to that.
Yeah.
With her colleagues working with community-based researchers as part of a team together, and how they changed that and amended that following lockdown, because a big feature of that project had been face-to-face meetings with some quite marginalized people acting as community researchers and really valuing the meetings, and how they created substitutes for those meetings when nobody could meet, using technology and using other ways. And they did that very creatively and very interestingly. And in a sense, the separation of these volumes is artificial, as these things always are, because care and resilience actually runs through all of them to a greater or lesser extent. Similarly, creativity and ethics runs through all of them.
And response and reassessment.
And response and reassessment, exactly. But another thing I think is interesting about this particular volume is that in the first section, with researcher care and resilience, all three of those contributions come from the UK. It's the only section in any of the three books which is geographically homogenous. And I thought, well, is this a coincidence? But I went and looked online, and actually the UK is pretty much leading the way when it comes to researcher well-being and work on that, written work on that, at least in English, because I haven't checked in other languages. I'm only really read English when it comes to this level of work. And there is quality work being done in other countries, but there's much more of it comes out of the UK. So that's reflected in this book, rather than being, I think, some kind of bias, or for any other reason. So that's yeah.
Well, it almost sounds like, say, one of the kind of implied points about this is the value of working in a team, and the importance of kind of care, and making sure that everyone is okay. I mean, certainly different kinds of research call for different roles and capabilities of the researcher. And as a qualitative researcher, I think about, well, if you are dealing with participants in a direct way, being kind of aware of your own kind of state of mind and emotional stability is going to be important in the ways that you interact with others. So but let's go on to the third one, and then we can kind of talk about the
just one more thing I do want to say, Janet, in this volume is the chapter by Hooper and others, Hooper, Sanford and Cornby, is a very important chapter, because it also sets the research, not just the research team in the research team's perspective, but it looks at the partners of the research. And this is really about research on care arrangements for young people in a vulnerable situation in care. And in a way, it gives a rationale and permission for people to not research if they're researching on a situation that's under incredible strain. And the most important thing is the research participants need to get on with their work. Then that is also reflected in what the overall landscape of what should be cared about, including the capacities of the care authorities to care for children. In this case.
Yes, I mean that is another theme that I have certainly heard from people, that it's not only that we've got to figure out new ways of collecting data, but what's happening in regard to the problem we were trying to study, because so many things have just been changed in some ways unrecognizably from the way they were before. And how do we even reframe the questions, or, as you say, perhaps take a pause in what we're doing to acknowledge what people are experiencing right now.
Exactly. Well, it actually takes us nicely into the third slide. Which is the third volume, which is on creativity and ethics. And I love the way that these two themes bundled themselves together. And so we have already been exploring ethics in all the contributions in the two preceding volumes. But in this case, the central exploration of ethics is around, of course, in COVID-19, this whole ethics versus economics big question. You know, the ethics of public health and saving lives and preventing disease, and at the same time, you know, opening the economies, not wanting the entire economy to die, and so on. But then, you know, this is not taking place, this pandemic is not taking place in a situation that was not already beset and besieged by crisis. We're full of Black Lives Matter protests, and within the pandemic, we see the social gradient that is affecting the health outcomes and the mortality outcomes. So it's a very important point for us to, in the, you know, this whole pandemic is an occasion for us to reflect on ethics, but not in a kind of a doomy way, but in a really quite optimistic way. And I think what's amazing about the contributions that we got was the creativity and the optimism, as well as the ethical commitment and ethical integrity, the research integrity that really came out. And we're really grateful to the contributors for contributing these amazing chapters on redesigning your research. And this, we just included two little graphics from the chapters there. On the right, we have an illustration from this beautiful project called Crafting Through Coronavirus. And you can see there the embroidery hoop and the little embroidery with French knots by this one research participant who decided that she was going to make one French knot for each mortality statistic, that the person would not be a statistic, but would be somehow remembered through crafting. But it's also about the creation of resilient communities and ethical communities through craft. And the other illustration really is from the Brazilian cooperative, which is the subject of research by the last chapter in the book by Goldstein, Vasquez, and Los Santos. And it's on the waste pickers cooperative in Sao Paulo, which is extremely a well-known exemplar of resilient and creative social inclusion practice. And they're creating different media representations and storytelling of what's been going on in that project as a way of stimulating resilience and responses in partner countries in Europe. So it's a really interesting theme that's just came out through what came to us in the submissions.
Right. So I wondered if you could just, you know, you've talked about, you know, a number of examples, you know, maybe go into a little bit more detail about, you know, one or two that, you know, particularly striking to you in terms of particularly, you know, how people have, you know, pivoted and, you know, like what might be helpful to MethodSpace readers who are, you know, trying to figure out how to move forward with their own research.
Well, it's kind of hard. There's so many good examples. It is quite hard. I think we've already talked about a few examples, but just maybe in terms of response and reassessment, thinking about what is helpful is like, of course, there are lots of chapters which give practical help on how to adapt and things to think about when you're adapting your research in this new age of COVID-19 using digital methods and so on. And there are some chapters on design, for example, and how we can incorporate design principles to make your research design more responsive to the situation, as well as more responsive to the needs of the participant and the research topic at hand. But also not to forget the methods that are already there, that are tried and tested, and including data sets, which are extremely robust because they have statistical effectiveness, for example. And not to forget those. Then, of course, all the things that, you know, Helen and I particularly are attracted to and love, just because these are the projects that we have other projects that we are also involved with. Helen's involved with creative research methods. And I've also just finished another collaborative editing project on decolonial interventions, including artistic practices and different types of community-based practices. So we've got a lot of different examples in the 3 volumes that talk about different sorts of collaborative, co-creative, and technically creative as well, materially creative practices that would hope to, and we basically hope to make the research, the area of research methods just a bit more joyful, which I know sounds a bit mad in this time of, you know, doom and pandemic and, you know, death and disease. But something that has come to us through the contributions, I think, is this joy of research, which we think is a real source of resilience for researchers and the research community.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that, you know, sometimes in a point like this of such an extreme and global crisis, that people are open to doing things a little bit differently, that, you know, some of the things that we've all been championing for a while now, you know, that, you know, suddenly people are going like, hey, you know, maybe that's a good idea, let's try that. And, you know, being a little bit more, you know, flexible, and maybe that's a part of the resilience piece too, that, you know, kind of being open to taking different approaches that, you know, before maybe it would have seemed, you know, too edgy or too, you know, out of the mainstream or something.
I think one of the really interesting things about this doing research in this time, in this pandemic, is that everyone is vulnerable. And before we were able to maintain this construct about how researchers would assess potential participants and decide which ones were vulnerable, which actually, when you think about it, is a very paternalistic way of going about things. And I've been questioning that for some time, and colleagues have too. But here in this pandemic, it is absolutely clear that although there are obviously still massive, it doesn't get rid of the structural inequalities and marginalization of people, but everyone is potentially vulnerable to this virus and to bereavement by this virus and to employment problems as a result of this virus. And that these vulnerabilities apply right across the board. And it's very interesting to me how our contributors have really recognized that and have really worked hard in a incredibly wide range of contexts to support their participants, to support their colleagues, to support themselves and each other. And I think that's another thing that kind of goes with the joy in research that Su-ming is talking about, which I completely endorse. It's been very interesting to see the joy and the care, both coming from all of these contributors, and such diversity. I mean, it's really thinking about reflecting on these contributions here today has very much reminded me that they are absolutely in beyond our wildest dreams territory from where we thought, what we thought we might get when we started. And the fact that they're really global. I mean, they go from Fiji and Tonga to Colombia in South America, several African countries, Middle East, Jordan and Lebanon and Palestine, India, Europe. You know, it's very, very diverse. The US, it's South Africa, it's New Zealand, Australia. There's barely a region of the world that's missed apart from the Antarctic, which I think is legitimate really in this context.
Well, see, now you're making me wish that we could have an interview with, you know, all of these authors and hear what their perspectives are and what they're going through, because, you know, it is such a difficult time. And I think, you know, for a lot of us, you know, it's a time of great isolation. You know, it's like on one hand, it's kind of both new connections of, you know, being, I think, less, as you say, you know, everyone's vulnerable, and there is an aspect that we're all in this together, and, you know, seeing kind of some of the disciplinary and, you know, kind of professional boundaries breaking down. I mean, we recently did a webinar with librarians, you know, talking about the role of libraries in universities at this time and the, you know, importance, because, you know, of course, you know, whether you are a student or a researcher, you know, being able to access the materials, and for people who, you know, suddenly they can't get back into their offices or to their libraries, you know, and so there, you know, so many kinds of disruption, and the creative responses and the caring, you know, willing to like just reach across, you know, the boundaries, that, you know, we can hope that, you know, those characteristics that you've described are ones that, you know, will be carried forward even when hopefully we get past this particular time. Is there anything else that you would like to share about kind of the publication process? Doing something, you know, in academic writing, typically this is something that, you know, I mean, I have edited books and I know how much time that took, and, you know, to go through the process, not only with the contributors, but, you know, say you're, as an editor, you're standing between the contributors and the publisher, and, you know, making all of that work together. So, you know, to do that, you know, in a way that, you know, as your title says, is, you know, is actually a rapid response. Is there anything that you would like to add about that?
Well, I'd like to add something. First of all, I'm really grateful to Policy Press and to Helen, because basically the project has allowed us to go about our work as well as we can in a very short time space, because we had some shared trust and values. So that was kind of established with the identity of the publisher. And also it's established in even though Helen and I had only had short connections, we had connections within a kind of a multinational kind of ethics project. And so the interesting thing about the whole collaborative process and the writing and the editing was really very much about the spirit that is embodied in the diversity of contributions, which is about breaking down barriers, because barriers can't just be hoped or wished away. Right. Barriers have to be broken down. And that means that editors have to be discerning about how much to help and to intervene editorially in different types of contributions. You know, with respect to giving the appropriate amount of respect to the author, for whom writing is a hard activity. And we're lucky that I think we have very complementary skill sets and knowledge bases, and that is also incredibly helpful. So yeah, to break down the divides, really, you know, we have been helped by the contributors to break down global divides, north and south, and we've been able to start thinking about our research as global as east to west and south to north, rather than north to south and west to east, for example, simply. To think in a non-hierarchical and collaborative way, because we have many teams which have a combination or mixture of experienced and early career researchers. And that, I think, has helped to the overall pool of wisdom from which we can draw, and expertise from which we can draw in a collaborative way. And I think we have seen that in all the team-based submissions have had a very thoughtful way in which they've managed their research teams, and they've helped us a great deal as editors as well. Helen, do you want to add something to that too?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think we've been fortunate in each other as co-editors, but also in our contributors. They've been super responsive. And we only lost one. There was one chapter that we accepted, but we only lost one. The poor author was unwell and wasn't able to see it through, and I think was very disappointed, but just, you know, couldn't do everything at once. And people were working under incredibly difficult conditions of their own. Several of our authors were ill, some with the virus during the process of producing this book. Some were in very difficult lockdown conditions and working hard in that. Some were health practitioners, you know, working maxed out in day jobs, but still responding to our emails within 24 hours, often much more quickly, and just phenomenally committed. Everybody seemed really phenomenally committed to getting these volumes out to help other researchers around the world, which is what we hope they will do. Points during the process, each one of us, myself, Su-ming, and also our editor, Philippa Grand at Policy Press, were on holiday, but also still answering emails about these books. Even if we weren't doing any other part of our work, we were keeping this project moving during our vacations, because we were all of us so committed and determined to get it done and get it done well. And I'm also really proud that we have, I mean, Su-ming mentioned the teams, and yes, absolutely that, but our sole authors, some are doctoral students, some are professors, some are applied researchers, they're not even all academics. And I really like the fact that we've got that breadth in these 3 little ebooks, which are going to be very affordable. That's another thing I'm really happy about. That's part of the Policy Press ethos. Each of these books is only going to cost a few pounds or a few dollars. So, you know, there's such a lot that I'm proud of in this project. It's been a big job of work, but it's been really worth doing. I know there are times where we've been emailing each other late at night going, oh my God, can I carry on much longer? But it's been so worth doing. I'm really happy. And now I just can't wait till they're actually through production and, you know, out and available for people in the world.
Well, we will share the link for the readers to be able to order these books, and hope that they, you know, provide some encouragement to people who are really, you know, struggling right now, because I think, you know, it continues to be a difficult time and will be for some time now. You know, for example, people I know who are supervising doctoral students where, you know, no research is being approved that has any kind of face-to-face interaction with participants. So you think, well, that's not only, say, qualitative interviews, but, you know, if you've got to, you know, if your research originally was in partnership with someone that was going to give you access to participants for a survey or anything, you know, it just, you know, people are really having to rethink the way they're going to approach what they're doing, and also the problems that they're studying, because a lot of the problems they were thinking about studying now, you know, the situation has changed. So I think it's a very timely to have, you know, some encouraging examples, because I know just in my own writing with MethodSpace, where, you know, I'm constantly looking for examples from the literature, and I'll look at the literature and I think, you know, this does not apply. You know, look at articles, even things that were published pretty recently, and you're like, you know, this approach couldn't be used now, or what they're studying, you know, it's not, you know, it's no longer you know, a concern, or, you know, in the same way. So certainly timely. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we close today?
No, I think that's, you know, we could always talk more about what's in these books because we like them so much.
Right. Well, thank you both for taking the time to share insights about this particular project, but, you know, also I think, you know, some of the kind of concerns that researchers are facing, and some positive ways that we can think about them. So thank you for taking the time to do this today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.